Okay, hopefully the issues have been addressed, and now we will continue with the meeting. Mr. Cairns, thank you for your patience, and the microphone is now yours.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll share my screen here and dive right in then. Okay, presentation is showing for everyone. Great, thank you. So thanks for having me today. Happy to be here at the Committee of the Whole meeting to give, I think, like a really exciting update on one of the sort of marquee planning projects happening in Canmore. Connect Downtown, planning a vibrant town center. So I have a presentation today that will walk us through sort of 5 key pieces. So we'll start off with a little bit of a refresher, going back to just, what are we doing? Quick reminder. Then we'll transition into what we've done, so a little bit of a progress update, followed by what we heard through our extensive community engagement that happened in February of this year, how that's translated into a vision for downtown, and then charting the next steps of where we go from here. So first off, what we are doing. A quick little refresher that Connect Downtown is a planning project, and really its purpose is to create an area redevelopment plan for the town center. And what that plan is going to do is support the continued evolution, growth, change, and ultimately the long-term vibrancy of downtown or the town center, the mixed-use core of Canmore. So the project's name really reflects our intent. It's to reimagine how people can access, gather, and interact with each other and with a network of public spaces to really support a thriving mixed-use area that can continue to thrive over the long term. As a reminder, an area redevelopment plan sort of falls into our middle tier of planning or regulatory documents. We have the municipal development plan as our highest level guiding document. That sets the overall policy direction or a vision for the town as a whole. And then we break up the town into smaller subsections that are usually guided by area redevelopment or area structure plans. And those take those sort of high level policy directions of the municipal development plan and chart a more area specific approach and vision to guide change and growth there as we move forward. So they'll naturally go into a little bit more detail, more specific development policies, establish a land use concept, and so on. And then implementation of that typically will involve amendments to other documents such as our land use bylaw, and that'll get into more of that nitty-gritty fine-tuned detail around building setbacks and certain design considerations. So an ARP can look and feel very different, but at its core, they have a lot of similar components. What we envision for the downtown ARP is really being centered around 4 key components, and that includes a public realm plan, which will articulate our vision for public spaces and our streetscape. So our parks, our open spaces, the design of our streets, the designs of our sidewalks, supported by a land use concept that articulates where we expect new development to happen and what that development should look like. More specific development policy that will inform any improvements that happen downtown. And then we want this to be an actual realized plan and not a plan for a plan. So there will be an implementation framework in there that would outline things like next steps, timing, priority status, and so on. As a refresher, this is our study area. It's naturally bigger than what some people might think of as the commercial portion of downtown. And that's acknowledging that we are looking at the residential areas as well. And any changes we do make, such as to Main Street, is going to have impacts that extend beyond that one specific block. So this study area allows us to also consider major opportunities and public amenities, such as Riverside Park, the Bow River, the Spur Line Trail to the north, Centennial Park to the south, as well as some underdeveloped areas along Railway Avenue to the southeast. The study area does not mean everything will change in there, but it is the area that is going to get looked at and the area that would have updated policy direction for it. So we're executing Connect Downtown through 4 phases of work. 3 of those phases are public facing. If we want to count council adoption of the actual plan itself as another phase, then it would be 5. But the 3 public facing phases of work are vision, options, and the draft plan. So our vision phase kicked off in October of 2023 with a committee of whole meeting and concluded at the end of February after a month-long period of extensive stakeholder and community engagement. And that's what we're going to be updating on today. So that visioning phase was about really broad engagement, really boots on the ground, hearing from the people, hearing from stakeholders, very open-ended types of conversations. And that's because we didn't want to constrain. We didn't want to presuppose that there was a direction this was going to go or a certain set of outcomes. So it was about hearing from the community and translating that into sort of a guiding vision that will inform where we go with the policy. This phase is wrapping up with this presentation to the committee of whole today, and sort of concurrently we're moving into the options phase of work. That is where we will actually take that vision and break it down into supporting policies. So what are the land uses? Where would we expect new developments? What building heights are we looking at? What improvements are we going to make to our public spaces? What do we do with the future of Main Street? And bring all those more detailed policy options to the community for engagement this summer, wrapping that up by the fall and moving into our draft plan phase where we'll make refinements based on what we heard following our summer engagement and actually build out that area plan where we're anticipating bringing it to council by March of 2025. So that's the process, which brings us to what we've actually done to date. So we concluded obviously the scoping phase, which was the pre-launch. And then as I mentioned, we just wrapped up our visioning phase, which is what this presentation today is covering. So engagement for vision phase, as I mentioned, was very broad. It was diverse. Really, our core objective was to hear from as many people as possible and to hear from a diverse group of people, which is really important because if we're doing this plan for the next 25 years, there's going to be different stakeholders, different residents, different aspiring residents. There's going to be youth that are living downtown in the future as adults. So we want to hear from everyone to try to make this be a downtown that works. So we did a lot of different methods and tools. We partnered with the middle school and I had 216 students in several different classes participate in a really fun asset mapping exercise, which I'll show you in a minute. We partnered with the Canmore Young Adult Network to have a pop-up event that was attended by 100 people. We had our marquee events, the warm up and the cool down event, which was participated with 800 people. And that's 800 that actually engaged with us in a project space. It didn't even include the several hundred more that participated in different concerts scattered around downtown. Public workshop event and also a stakeholder workshop, which was represented by 22 stakeholder organizations. And then we had our really robust online engagement where we had 476 submissions in total. So this visioning phase of engagement, as I mentioned, was broad, and we really collected input on a lot of things. How people are experiencing downtown today, what are their perspectives on Main Street, assets, like what places do they love, what places do they use, what could be improved, what are their priorities, or what do they see as an ideal future downtown. Some of the core values that guide this work, and some early ideas around how we could actually transform downtown in support of their priorities and values. So as I mentioned, we had the youth asset mapping. This just gives you a little flavor of what that looked like. Really fun, class-led exercise. And the whole idea was acknowledging that youth today are the adults of tomorrow that are going to engage with us downtown. Let's get them, to draw a map from memory today of downtown so that we can understand what do they actually care about, what do they remember as their downtown, and then pivot to let's create a map of their ideal downtown tomorrow so we can get interesting insights of things that youth value rather than just combining those all into our broader engagement and usually missing out on those specific narratives and perspectives. Then we had our marquee events, the warm-up, where we partnered with local businesses downtown, 4 venues to be specific, and we hosted 11 different concert performances all night. And those were anchored by what we call the warm-up hub at the Civic Center, where we had fire pits, a live DJ, food, beverage, and then our inside engagement space. Super successful, and it really showed if we step away from the more traditional tools of engagement, which typically have limited turnout and very specific and narrow representation, you can still get the community very excited about these projects and really hear from a diverse group. So in total, I think the success of these tools really are showcased here. We had over 1,600 direct interactions with a really diverse group of people. And that helped make sure that this vision, which is going to inform all the subsequent phases of work, really is in the broader community interest and really reflects a diverse population base. So who we heard from, this is just a little taste of that. A lot of different stakeholders, everything from tourism to people representing accessibility or climate. But then on the public side, really summarizing how successful this engagement was. You can see even just in the survey respondents breakdown, almost equal representation across every demographic and age bracket. Really good turnout from Canmore business owners, really good turnout from Canmore residents, and then also a really strong turnout from the employment base in Canmore as well. So this shows that we really engaged a broad group and actually succeeded at addressing expected shortfalls like underrepresentation from youth. Okay, so that was the methods, the process, who we heard from. Now we'll pivot to what we actually heard through the vision phase. So one of the key takeaways was there's lots of things that people love about downtown today. These are just the top ones that we heard from the community. So they love that it's compact. They love that it's centrally located, great access to other spots, easy to access as well. Unique character in terms of having a lot of mix of local businesses, strong connection to the mountains, super walkable, friendly, it's a sense of community. As I mentioned, scenic views of the mountains. Lots of love for the seasonal pedestrianization zone of Main Street. And then also how well connected downtown actually is to trails and green spaces. It's a really accessible place. It's easy to go for runs. It's easy to engage with nature. So that's things that rose to the top from the community perspective. And then what's interesting is when we heard from the youth, there was actually a lot of overlap. They love that downtown to them is walkable. They actually loved the car-free Main Street. A lot of support as well for parks and recreation areas. But what was interesting was youth actually were the only ones to really cite how much they loved indoor spaces downtown and actual landmarks, things we didn't hear from the adults. So they love the Civic Center as a main gathering space, a place where they can meet with friends and hang out. And they also love things like the Engine Bridge. It's places where they play, gives them a sense of nostalgia. It's where they can go meet others, spend time away from home. And I think that just goes to show you that when we're designing the downtown, we need to hear from everyone because they actually engage in these spaces differently. And it really changes how we think about where we go in the next 10, 20, and 30 years. So even though there's lots of people love, as always, there's room for improvement. There's still a lot of changes people want to see. The gray bars in the back of these are just to show you the frequency that these things were cited by people. Helps give you a bit of an idea of like the order of magnitude of how common they were based on our survey results specifically. Just give a little bit of animation to this. So you can see by almost an order of magnitude of 2 to even the second most commonly cited theme, people want to see a downtown that's focused on people and pedestrians, not vehicles. This is our town center. It's where people come together. It's where they engage. That was the top priority. But building off that, we also need to still better manage parking and vehicle movement. We do need to make sure this network works, that people can access where they need to access, move through, or get to downtown in ways that work. Third, we also need to invest in placemaking and the public realm, acknowledging that our downtown is our town center. It is a special place. It is where residents come. It is where residents are proud of. It's also where tourists come and invest money. This is a place we need to elevate to a higher standard. Then moving down the list, still really strong turnout and key themes, provide a mix of businesses that are more suited to residents. So things like more day-to-day services, improve pedestrian and bike infrastructure for accessibility, and let's make it more active and vibrant all day, all year. So this isn't just a summer, June, July, August type of place. So we kind of left the door open. We asked them, well, how would you describe your ideal future downtown? And these were the words that rose to the top. And far away, we can see again, vibrant or synonyms with vibrant. But generally this idea that it needs to be vibrant, lively, active, beautiful, cherished, celebrated. It is our town center. Let's embrace that. Building off that, going down the list, walkable was a really key value for how people describe their future downtown. Accessible, lively, welcoming, and diverse. So when we asked them, okay, well, what are some guiding values for how we could, or sorry, what a future downtown should embrace? Like if downtown realized our vision, if it realized your ideal future, what values would it embody? And we put some draft ones out there based off council approved strategies, plans, and work that has been done to date, because we weren't starting from ground zero. But then we also opened the door to other values as well. And so a key takeaway here is you can see distinct, connected, inclusive, accessible, active meaning lively, and resilient, really strongly resonated with the community. In almost all cases, we had overwhelming majority support. And even resilient had really strong turnout with about 2/3 fully agreeing, and I think only about 1/5 disagreeing with that value. So clearly on the right track and a lot of broad consensus in the community with these guiding values. And we also put out there some possible big ideas or ways that we could shape downtown and then open the door to community ideas as well. So 10 big ideas were identified. These were things based off of some of the early work we had done, early conversations with stakeholders, council approved strategies. And there are things like at the top, well, embrace nature and views of the mountains as defining elements, embrace Main Street as Canmore's year-round gathering space, connect downtown to the Bow River, Policeman Creek, and key destinations, foster a lively commercial entertainment district, repurpose underused spaces, build a resilient, accessible, and multi-purpose public space network, establish a pedestrian-oriented corridor on 9th Street, provide housing options that respond to the needs of the community, create a special and unique sense of place, and create gateways that can really help welcome people as they arrive downtown. And again, a key theme with the values was really overwhelming, broad consensus and support with the community, pretty unanimous across the board. Gateways a little bit less support, and that I think stemmed from a little bit of confusion around, well, what are gateways and what does that mean? So then we opened up the door too and asked, well, okay, these were just early ideas. What are your big ideas for how you change or transform downtown? And these are what people self-identified. Far and away, the most common big idea that was identified was fully pedestrianized Main Street or make it a place for people. Further, as we move down the list, a really strong theme as well was let's create this idea of like a large celebration or welcome plaza, something that can really like anchor downtown, host big events, festivals, get a lot of animation to this space. Also establish an arts and culture district. And that big idea really came from this idea of an arts and culture district is something that is really resident oriented. It's something they can engage with and give them a reason to come downtown in the winter months as well. And we saw that through the warm up event. Other big ideas included allowing higher density mixed use developments. An interesting one was this idea of smaller hotels, just acknowledging that they can still add a little bit of vibrancy and nightlife to the area, which is something downtown's missing. Protect views and views and a mountain town character, make downtown more welcoming, specifically with this idea of being more family friendly or having more low cost facilities so you don't have to spend money to go downtown. Surface parking lots, bit of an opportunity there for other uses. And then this idea that we could winter-proof downtown. So let's not just put in uses that might give people a reason to come downtown in the winter. Let's actually make it a winter comfortable place. And then we asked them, okay, well, in your ideal future, assuming it were convenient and can meet your needs, how would you actually want to access downtown? What would be your preferred way? Interestingly, walking rose to the top by far, followed by cycling, driving, transit, and micromobility. And what's really great about this outcome is that it does align really closely with the town's integrated transportation plan. So there's a lot of parallels there and synergies, and it shows that that plan is on the right track. And there's not really a major pivot that needs to be made for downtown necessarily. And then I think if we had to sum this all up, when we had the open-ended feedback, ideation, ask people what they want to see, a really clear theme that rose to the top was they do want to see a more pedestrianized Main Street. It didn't matter how they were asked. It didn't matter if we prompted them with anything, if they were just self-identified. 87% feel that the seasonal closure has had a very positive impact on downtown. Exact same result, 87% also stated that they think the future Main Street should have more space for people and permanent public spaces, not temporary. And then finally, I think the most impressive of all was 111 people, unprompted, whether it was asking them like, what's your big idea for downtown or something else, all suggested that Main Street should be closed year round and the number of vehicles downtown should be reduced overall. Okay. So translating what we heard and taking all that away and working it into a vision. And we'll call this a working vision because this is only the visioning phase. As this work goes on, we're going to do engagement, put more out there to the community, and we're just acknowledging that things might change. This is not a fixed state item. It's going to be iterative, and the final plan might have a vision that's a little bit different than this. So attached to the council report today is a vision document. And that's really outlining the summaries of what we heard, concluding the visioning phase, and then translating that into a vision statement, some core values and big ideas to guide our work as we move forward. So that vision document has three main components to it. A vision statement, as I mentioned, which is really the long-term aspirations for downtown, capturing like what's that desired future state we're trying to work towards. As you go down the hierarchy, that vision is broken down into 6 values. And those values are really core principles, priorities, or beliefs that we feel that downtown should embrace or embody. Then we move into the big ideas, which are transformative concepts that would really change downtown in a way that works with those values above it, and then at the top, that high-level vision statement. Moving on into the next phase of work, as I mentioned, the options phase, that's what comes next. That's where we take those higher level plan documents and break them down into actual policy options that support each of those pieces. And so we put out a working vision, as I mentioned, and that really reflects what we heard through our broad engagement. So I'll read that out to you quickly, but in the year 2050, downtown Canmore stands as a leading example of sustainable mountain living, defined by its ability to seamlessly connect people and nature. It has a unique character, distinguished by a relationship to the natural landscape and industrial past, and the diverse cultures that shape it. Its residents move using safe and accessible connections, enjoying views of the mountains along the way. Visitors are welcomed and come downtown to experience a thriving, mixed-use town center in one of Canada's most beautiful settings. In the year 2050, downtown is celebrated as Canmore's vibrant and resilient year-round community hub. So as I mentioned, that's where it takes all those pieces we've heard so far today and folds it up into a very descriptive statement about the future state of downtown. But as I mentioned, it is working. It is a draft. This might change as we continue to go through this iterative planning and engagement process. So then breaking down that vision is really 6 core values that the future downtown should embody. We have distinct, which is this idea that in 2050, downtown embraces a unique character that really reflects its geographic setting and its status as Canmore's town center. The second value is connected. So in 2050, that means downtown is easy to navigate and it offers convenient connections to destinations, amenities, and communities. Third, this is one that we made an adjustment from following our engagement because it rose to the top of a lot of the feedback we heard. And it's this idea that downtown should be vibrant. It should be lively and active all day, every season. We have accessible. So in 2050, downtown works for people of all ages, incomes, backgrounds, and abilities. And then similarly, also downtown is inclusive. So in 2050, it fosters a sense of belonging and it's welcoming to a diversity of residents, visitors, and businesses. And then finally, we have resilient. This aligns with a lot of council committed strategies and plans. It's something that still had broad support in the community. And it's this value that really describes downtown as being adaptable. Its businesses, its residents, its infrastructure can all withstand climate impacts, but also other changes and economic changes that might emerge over time. We stayed with resilient. We heard a lot of support and interest in downtown should be sustainable in the community. That's an easier word to approach. But resilient really better embodies what we need to try to do downtown, and it aligns with some of the climate commitments we've also made. And then finally, moving from the values, we have our 10 big ideas. These are the big transformative concepts that will change downtown, and each of these ideas aligns with one or more of those values. So we have embrace nature and mountain views as one of the top ones. So that big idea is that we're going to distribute and design buildings in our public spaces in ways that embrace that connection to nature, but also embrace those mountain views as really defining foundational elements. Second, we're going to make Main Street a great street. So let's redesign Main Street as a pedestrian-oriented, year-round public space for gathering and activity for everyone. From the creek to the Bow, let's provide efficient connections and linkages and really make the Bow River and Policeman Creek and that whole natural asset part of downtown and actually feel like downtown, not a bit of a disconnected space. Fourth, make downtown year-round. So we're going to look at providing spaces and land uses that support street activation and welcome people day and night, rain or shine. 5, repurpose underused spaces. So develop underused or vacant land to address gaps and enhance vibrancy. 6, create accessible and adaptable spaces. So for that piece, we're going to really look at, well, how can we design our buildings and some of our new public spaces in a way that actually welcomes everyone, but also will offer a level of adaptability so they can adapt over time to a changing environment, but also adapt within a same day to be able to host different types of events or opportunities or community-led initiatives so that they can really work for everyone. And then moving on, we have number 7, housing for a more diverse population. So looking at how we can provide more housing opportunities in residential areas to better meet the needs of a diverse population being a key word. So housing for all, so to speak. 8, a distinct character. This was something we heard really strongly from the community. And it's this idea that downtown is downtown and it is not a different area. It is not Jasper, it is not Banff, it is not some other mountain community. It's not Revelstoke. How do we embrace that? So let's create a special and unique sense of place that really distinguishes downtown from other areas within the town, but also elsewhere, and celebrates what makes it unique, celebrates its connections to nature, the mountains, and its rich history. Number 9, create a neighborhood heart. This is something that a lot of people felt is missing. So we're going to look at how can we establish a pedestrian-focused corridor that's really anchored by a central plaza, kind of like that idea of a celebration plaza that a lot of the community felt passionately about, that can really anchor downtown, provide a heart, and offer captivating spaces for the community to actually engage with it. And then finally, number 10 for our big idea is a low impact community. So looking at how we can design downtown in a way that fosters sustainable development and then minimizes negative impacts on the environment and ecosystems as well. So where do we go from here? We have this working vision that we're going to build off of. We have our values that we know are what should embody downtown. And then we have our 10 big ideas for how we'll change it. So now from there, we're going to take those pieces and we're going to develop key policy options that actually support those. So looking at what does a land use concept look like that aligns with all of these things? What does the transportation network look like? What do we do with our parks and our open spaces? We're advancing those explorations now, and we anticipate public and stakeholder engagement on those in the summer. As we move into the fall, based on what we heard throughout engagement, we'll make refinements to policy and we'll wrap up our outstanding studies. In the fall and winter, we'll move into the drafting phase of the actual plan, do another round of public and stakeholder engagement to make sure that this resonates with the community and stakeholders. And then finally, as I mentioned at the start of this presentation, spring 2025, anticipating council consideration of the ARP, which of course would involve another round of engagement, but that would be through the more formal process of a public hearing. Thank you, and happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cairns. And I would look to the committee of the whole members to let me know if you would have a question. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Cairns, for the presentation. I want to just, the term mountain views. We get a lot of appeals around, my view is going to be obstructed. And in the past, we said that is not really a planning consideration. If a phrase like this is in a document like this, is it now a planning consideration?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we're doing area plans, we are setting the policy prior to making changes to the land use bylaw. So we are setting the vision, we're setting the priorities, and it becomes a foundational aspect. So while land use bylaw might deal with very specific considerations like these are the heights that we're going to allow here and the densities, that ultimately does get informed by a plan before it. That's what this area plan does. So if that's something that we feel is a priority, we can look to actually distribute land uses, enable new development in ways that still align with that, if that makes sense.
Okay. I might follow up with that in a little bit. Let me just regurgitate that in my brain for a bit.
Other questions? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. So I'm just going to play off of Councillor Graham's comment. So within this report, what we heard is a report you've also talked about, or it's also been articulated, preserving important views, but we want to densify. So those are two somewhat competing priorities. And how do you think that that will be balanced as this plan is massaged to its final presentation?
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good point. I think if you distill them down to their roots, they might come off as competing, but we are looking at a large area of land with a lot of different streets, a lot of different unique characteristics. And so when we're looking at, well, how do we distribute density? There's still opportunities to acknowledge the nuance behind that. So while we will look, of course, at, well, how do we enable new housing opportunities so downtown can be more affordable, so it can support a year-round resident base and employee housing? There's still questions of, are there key public spaces where we do want to preserve that connection to nature, connection to the mountains? And I think what we heard from the community is Main Street being a key one, that feeling that you can be at a restaurant or walking down the street and you can have that sense of connection to the mountains. Those are still things we can work with while still opening up new housing opportunities, new commercial opportunities in key spots as well. So it's more about in this large area, how do we distribute it in ways that still work with that rather than a site-by-site basis, like, is this going to impede someone's views? Because of course, when we look at this at a macro level, it's about the community interest. How do we preserve views from key public spaces? Less about a view that's there today from one individual property.
When the middle school students provided you their feedback on what they'd like to see downtown, and they expressed how much they loved the Civic Center. Did they articulate it was because of all the free internet?
That's a good question. Caroline is in the room today. I don't know, Caroline, if you want to speak to that. Caroline's our communications coordinator, of course, and she worked really closely with the youth on this project. So she has a bit more of the nuance there.
They all come here. I know this because I had kids that went to LGMS.
Hello, councillors. That's what we kind of thought, and it was actually interesting because, as you could probably hear in the background, there were youth enjoying the space over lunchtime. And partially, yes, the Wi-Fi is a draw, but over and over, the youth identified, like, this is a safe place for us to come and be with our friends in all weather, and they pointed to a lack of common indoor spaces where youth feel welcome and safe. And it's a bit of they're absolutely welcome here. It's a bit of an unusual choice, but it really pointed to that the youth are feeling that need in a space that's not built necessarily for them, although they are definitely welcome here. But they identified, and it wasn't just youth. I think it came up again and again from other residents as well, that there is a lack of indoor space, and that prevents kind of that year-round vibrancy, because for people to gather, it's primarily in the summer months where you can gather outdoors, where otherwise you're paying to enter a private facility.
Yeah, I would agree.
Right.
That's why places like Elevation Place and the Civic Center and even CRC are great places to hang out. And just one final question. In terms of the conversations around the Main Street closure, or opening, as I like to put it, we're opening it to people and closing it to cars. Were there what was informing the conversations around, sorry, no, because you'd already said that they weren't prompted. The discussions or the answers around full year closure, was there any conditions on that statement, and only if this happens, or was it just like close Main Street 12 months of the year?
Yeah, at this stage, it was pretty broad, open-ended, so there is not level of specificity there. It was unprompted in the sense that we didn't want to presuppose this was going to go a certain way. We didn't want to lead with, Main Street will become either a street open to vehicles or a street open to people only. So we asked for, what has been your thoughts on the seasonal pedestrianization so far? Has this been overall positive for downtown? What are your thoughts on a future of Main Street? What should that look like? Should it include more types of these spaces? And then there was the completely unprompted, broadly open-ended, like, how would you change downtown, where people, the 111 people, as we had mentioned, self-identified, let's pedestrianize Main Street. So naturally, there's a lot of nuance there. People have different ideas. But I think a lot of those ideas will come out in the options phase, where we actually bring something forward that we think reflects the feedback, and then can hear from people in very specific detail, like, what do you actually like about this? What is working for you? Or on the flip side, what is not working for you in this concept and what needs to be changed?
Right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Dr. Cottle, did you have something you wanted to say? No. Councillor Graham, back to you. Or actually, before you, Councillor Ma, and then it will go to you and then to Councillor Fulbright.
Thank you. Thank you, Worship. Josh, great presentation. Really appreciated it. Really love the fact that you spoke to younger folks as well to get their insight. A question about the celebration piece. Do you think of that as more as like one element, or is that like celebration spaces scattered throughout the entire downtown ARP area?
Mm-hmm. Yep, good question. In the vision phase, like what we heard from the public was this idea of we really need an anchor space, something that is central, large, really pulls the community together, can host large events, things like festivals, or even things like a farmer's market downtown again. So that idea from the public, I think, was really centered on this singular space. For downtown, that's obviously something now, as a result, we're going to look at, like, can we create a really large central celebration plaza to kind of do this sort of heavy lifting for the community? But we're also looking, as I mentioned, at our parks, our public spaces, the spots that do exist today, and what opportunity there are for those in the long term to actually be more functional for a broader range of people. And that includes the ability to also host some of these more like smaller scale events, for example. Yeah, so a little bit of both.
Okay. And this is another question that kind of twigged to mind because I love all the infrastructure ideas that come in. But part of me wonders at what point do we start like looking at how like policies towards how people can actually like interact with the spaces. So it's one thing to build the great spots, but if they're like challenging to access, there's a lot of hoops you got to jump through to take advantage of it. When does that sort of stuff come into play? So that, you know, we can take what we create and really like fill it with like energy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the design piece, as you mentioned, and there's the function and how does this actually work once it's built. And we've seen many cases around the world where we build something, has a great idea behind it, but it falls a little bit flat. So behind this, that's where we're really checking in on those core values and things that resonate with the community. So we're leading with this idea of vibrancy. We're leading with this idea of accessibility and knowing that those are really two integral pieces to make this work. So we can't, if we're doing a celebration plaza, we can't just pave a space and expect that to work for people. It needs to be elevated in a lot of different ways and work for a lot of different people if we want it to really succeed. So those are all things we'll look at through the ARP, but naturally as well, as you know, when these things become actual capital projects, there's typically another round of engagement as on the conceptual design as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Worship. Just wanted to follow up on the pedestrianization zone. It's been wildly popular as a seasonal fixture to our community. It's something I really appreciate, and a lot of the community certainly does. The idea of a year-round pedestrian zone, you got 111 people unprompted to support that idea. It's certainly an idea I'm keen to explore. And I want to know, was there any opposition to the idea of a year-long pred zone? And if so, what was that opposition?
Thank you. Yeah, hard to distill what the opposition was because we didn't ever ask questions like, you know, would you support a pedestrianization of Main Street? A lot of it was organic and self-identified. So there wasn't a lot that were opposed to it, but as you'd expect, a lot of people were concerned about, regardless of what happens on Main Street, the principles behind it. Like, how do we maintain accessibility for residents who are trying to go downtown for work or to do basic services or shopping? Same thing for the parks and public spaces, right? So the accessibility piece, I think, is where concerns come from about Main Street. And most of that was in reference to the seasonal pedestrianization. Similarly, the people that have to move through downtown, getting to the other side of the valley. So those are all pieces when we do our transportation planning that we're going to look at and make sure that no matter what we do on Main Street, whether it's closed or partially closed or open to pedestrians, I should say, the rest of the network still works and people can still access it in a very intuitive, functional way. And ideally, that is a way that's much more convenient than today.
So will that feedback be sought in this next round with draft policies?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So we anticipate bringing to the public a concept for Main Street, and we'll get feedback on that. What's working for you? What isn't? What do you like? What do you not like? What concerns do you have? In addition to feedback on the land use concept, the transportation network as a whole. And we'll get into those more detailed conversations with the public then.
Yeah, thank you. If this question's probably very premature, and if so, just say so. If we were to look at a year-round ped zone, how would we roll that out? Would we do like a trial year? Would we? I don't know. This is a premature conversation.
That's
Yeah,
really premature.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Faubert.
Mr. Cairns actually answered my question with his last response. I wanted to know more about how the transportation planning would occur within the context of the downtown, and I got that answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mara.
Thank you, and probably around the same thoughts. I was just going to ask, it was interesting that transit was number 4 on their way, people getting to downtown. Did anyone indicate if it was like, if it's wintertime, I walk or preferred walking and then I take transit in the winter? Was there any distinction there? And I know these are high-level questions, and just wondering if there's any comment in that area.
Not a lot. We did do really detailed analysis and questions around how we access downtown today, by season, how often, by what mode. But when it came to this question, it was, ideally, if this could work for you and we're convenient, how would you want to access downtown? And I think there's a lot of gravity and momentum behind vehicle over transit, right? Because people are familiar with it, it's convenient, you can park wherever you want to park today, go wherever you need to go. It's hard when we're trying to change that mindset and make transit more convenient when it may not be perceived as convenient today. So it's really hard to put yourself in that place. So I think the familiarity was a really strong reason behind that.
Thank you.
Ms. Smithers, did you have something you wanted to add? No? Okay. I had a question. May not have come from the feedback, but I'm wondering if it may be part of the consideration going forward, and that's perhaps allocating some space for Indigenous ceremony. I know in speaking with some in the Indigenous community, they're very much interested in having spaces where they can, that they know are distinctly held for them to do ceremony when they feel the need to do ceremony there without having to ask permission or book a space or something like that. And so I'm just wondering if that will be part of the considerations going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Crosser. Yeah, we've done formal invitations to the Soy Nakota and the other Indigenous nations. We're going to plan on doing another round of that ahead of our summer engagement so that they can be a part of the process if they choose to be. When we plan these spaces, we are looking at what's the multitude of uses these can do, so it's not just single user groups. So as part of this process, we're looking at the long-term function of all of our park spaces, looking at what core elements those could have so that they can accommodate these different types of events and not just be limited to, hey, Riverside Park is a green space, leave it as that. So yeah, the multitude of uses is a really key thing underpinning this. And it'll tie in as well to some of the other master planning work underway around the cultural master plan, which have some of those elements and considerations as well.
Great, thank you. Looking to see if there are any other questions. Seeing none, I want to thank you for your presentation today. And I do want to pass along to yourself and all those in communications and the planning departments around the downtown events that were held. The warm up and cool down received so many positive comments about that engagement. It was very successful, not only in engaging people in large numbers in an interesting way, but a lot of people commented about the feel downtown when it was going on was something that is something they would love to see replicated. So kudos to all involved for that. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Mayor and Council, for the time today. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So thank you for that and have a good rest of your day. We'll now move on to item D2. This is the Phase Out Tourist Home Designation Implementation Plan Update. Ms. Rogers, you have a familiar face with you.
I do.
Presenting again
Yes.
to council.
I thought I would reintroduce or introduce Catherine Van Kuympema. We've been fortunate enough to have Catherine join the team to help us advance this work. Catherine was the former manager of finance here at the town a few years ago, and she has actually been intimately involved in where we evolved tourist homes from her time here before. So she brings lots of context and is saving my life. So I really appreciate that you're here.
I don't know about that, but hopefully I'm helpful.
Ms. Van Kuympema?
Yes, very good.
Yes.
Mayor Krauser, members of council. I'm very pleased to be back in front of you to talk about stuff that kind of was niggly stuff when I was here before as a manager of finance, and I'm really glad to get the opportunity to hopefully do some stuff about it that maybe wasn't as possible 5 years ago. Yeah. So on May 7th, Ms. Rogers had presented to you as part of the Housing Action Plan. She'd promised you that we would be coming back to you with information to the May Committee of the Whole and the June Committee of the Whole for the implementation for a couple of your objectives as far as permanent housing goes. And so this is the first of that. So as Ms. Rogers has been letting you know, we're in a housing crisis. I don't think that's anything new to council. And as part of your addressing that, you've come up with initially 3 objectives to address that crisis. And what we're doing is we wanted to share with you our plan for the direction that we want to go in regards to one of them, which is phasing out the tourist home designation. And one way to ensure long-term occupancy is to do that. And we want to know, by coming to you today, is if you have any objections to what we think we're going to do, how we're going to do it. So how did we get to where we are today? So in June of 2023, Council directed that work begin to phase out the tourist home designation. And then in September of 23, in order to start working on that, you had struck the livability task force. So then January of this year, the task force came back with their recommendations, objectives. As I was reading the document, sometimes it was objectives, sometimes it was recommendations. And then that brings us to today, which is taking one of those recommendations and letting you know what our overarching implementation plan would be. So the Livability Task Force objectives or recommendations, there were 3 that we're looking at initially, is 1, first of all, to phase out the tourist home designation. In second, incentivize long-term full-time residency or occupancy of the existing housing stock in town. And then the third was to investigate a way to incentivize purpose-built rentals. Today's presentation deals with number 1. June's will deal with number 2, and number 3 will come to you at some future to be determined council meeting date, or committee of the whole date, probably first. So that brings us to 1, what's the implementation plan? So I've initially identified 6 key actions, not necessarily in any particular order, except for the last 2 are housekeeping ones. So those would logically come at the end of the other 4. So exploring those a little bit more, a big key action is prevention. How do we prevent more tourist homes from being developed? And I wish I could say that it was easy, you just wave your magic wand and it would be done, but such is not the case. Canmore regulates our tourist home or our residential short-term rentals through our land use bylaw, and they do that through the tourist home designation. And the reason why it was brought in that way is it allowed Canmore to control the location of those short-term rentals. The concern of the day was they didn't want them nilly-willy all throughout town. They wanted to make sure that they were in certain areas. So that was the mechanism that was chosen at the time. Contrast Banff. You think, well, Banff's put a moratorium on this. They've stopped it. How come we can't? So I think it's important to look at how Banff takes care of short-term rentals, and they regulate short-term rentals. Everyone is a bed and breakfast. So they have bed and breakfast, and then they have your traditional commercial hostels and hotels. They don't have this tourist home or visitor accommodation or these lots of different land uses. So what happens is the bed and breakfasts are a discretionary use in their land use bylaw, and in order for you to operate your bed and breakfast, you need a license. So they make sure that because it's discretionary, they don't automatically have to, whereas Canmore, we have districts where it is a permitted use, so we don't have a choice. The licensing, I talked to Kelly Gibson, the CAO at the town of Banff, and said, tell me more about what's happening. They're undergoing a rewrite, the regulations surrounding bed and breakfasts, but for right now, their moratorium isn't that they're not issuing any more licenses. It's not that they're not renewing any licenses. Right now, they have a limited number of bed and breakfast licenses that can be issued in each district. So what they're doing is they're not increasing that at all. If a license doesn't get renewed and one becomes available, they might consider offering another one, but they would not increase the numbers, even if, say, for example, a district allows 30 and there's only 25 issued. Right now, they're not going to bring it up to the 30. So on the flip side, Canmore, tourist homes are permitted use. Some areas are discretionary use. Our tourist homes right now, we also require them to have a license if they're going to operate it for short-term rentals. But all tourist homes require the initial development permit. So it's a one-time development permit, then an annual business license that you require, and that's through the business registry licensing bylaw. If you're going to rent out your tourist home on a long-term basis, you would not need a license. So it's just for the short-term rentals. So another key piece of information about prevention, how many tourist homes do we have? So right now, we have 716 operating, but another 37 are underway. So permits have been issued. So we can't stop them at this point. Of the 716 tourist homes, there's the opportunity for those who own tourist homes to declare that it's for a personal use. So they, every year, statutory declaration. And what that says is, I don't plan in the coming year to rent it out either short-term or long-term. I'm just going to use it for my own personal use. In that case, they make a manual statutory declaration, and then they get taxed at the residential rate. If we had not had the personal use, how much more taxes would have been shifted onto those tourist home personal use properties? It would have been $302,000. So it's not an extra $302,000. It's that you would have shifted $302,000 off of the other residential taxpayers onto these tourist homes. So what you really want to know, what are we going to do about it? So right now, the implementation plan, what we're proposing, is that you think you could just remove it from the land use bylaw. However, it's not that simple. It's imperative that we know what other documents would be impacted. What other documents refer to tourist homes? What other documents allow it? There's ASPs and all kinds of things that would have to be looked at. So that's part of a lot of work. And it requires looking at all of the statutory documents. It takes time and resources. As part of the process, we're going to make sure that we develop that process, come back to council and let you know. But we're going to need resources to do that work, to expect our planning department to do it off the side of their desk. We won't be able to enact the changes that council's looking for in a timely manner. So any resources we would need to help us review all of those documents would be funded out of the Housing Action Plan capital project that you had approved the additional money for earlier this month. And it's important to note that the Three Sisters Village will be a separate endeavor because there's other planning implications for that area. As well as something else that's really important to know, existing tourist homes are grandfathered in. So just because you remove tourist home from the land use bylaw doesn't mean that they all cease to exist. Existing ones are grandfathered in, which means that those with a valid license can continue to rent those out short term. So another action that we would be looking to take as part of the implementation plan is to get tax alignment. So right now, in 2013, Council had adopted the subclass bylaw, residential subclass bylaw, 2013-01, creating that personal use subclass for tourist homes. So what we would be doing as part of the implementation is removing that as a subclass in that bylaw so that tourist home is a tourist home is a tourist home, and a residential is a residential is a residential, and not a hybrid of the two. It's important to note that up until 2022, there was a special rate for tourist homes that was between the residential and the non-residential. Starting in 22, Council has been taxing the tourist homes at the non-residential rate, and the tourist home personal use has been at the residential rate. So right now, that personal use process requires annual, manual statutory declarations from all owners. And so it's been labor-intensive process, and it can be onerous for the property owners. So what about the implementation for tax alignment? It would mean amending that bylaw, 2013-01. All tourist homes have the same classification with the same rate. The amended bylaw would come to council, so this is a council touch point for you. You would get the amended bylaw and you can decide whether or not you want to make those choices. As a result, the personal use statutory declaration would no longer be required. This needs to be accomplished if we want to have this in effect for the 2025 property taxes. We need to have this in effect in the fall of 2024. So you'll be seeing that bylaw fairly quickly if this is something that you would like us to continue on with. Because the thing is it would become what is the assessment class those properties belong to, and that's decided as at December 31st so that the assessors can get the notices of assessments out. So that's why we're going to work on this fairly soon. So another action is if one wants to, how do you convert to residential? Rather than being a tourist home anymore, I never intend to rent this out to anyone other than a long-time permanent person, or I'm going to live there myself. How can I convert this? So what we want to do is we want to develop a process for those owners who would like to do that conversion. What does that look like? Don't know. Will there be a fee? Probably, because there will be a cost to that. But we're going to put together this process for doing that and bring it to council as an information piece. And to see if there's, in regards to fees and if there's any limitations. Something to be noted when you're looking at conversion, we can't force somebody to convert to the residential. This would be at the property owner's request. And once it's converted to residential, they can't change their mind and revert back to the tourist home. So another action is regulation and enforcement. I think this is something that has been coming up over and over and over again. So this is an opportunity to see if there's ways that we can beef up, make it easier or more likely to get compliance by making the changes. And that's going to come by making some changes to the business registry licensing bylaw, which is where the licenses come in play for renting out short term. By beefing up the business registry licensing bylaw, not only changing what the fees are for short-term rentals, but also making it a requirement that when you're advertising for your short-term rental, your premises displays it, it has a number that's in the advertising, and we're also collecting the information that we need in order to contact people when there's noise complaints or any other complaints in and around that short-term rental of a property. To be effective, we can't just do enforcement reactively. In order to be effective, we need to have proactive enforcement, which means going in and auditing, looking through listings, seeing if the licensing number is posted on the advertisement, are people complying? And that, again, comes back to needing resources to do that. And so, as part of us developing the processes that are involved with enforcement, that will allow us to determine how many resources we need to conduct the enforcement program. And so that we'll bring that to council to let you know what the resources would be, but also as part of the operating budget request. You'll see that coming up at budget time. One thing to note is that the business registry bylaw does rely on some of the definitions that you can find in the land use bylaw. And some of those definitions might be changed as part of the updating or changing of the planning documents, but that doesn't mean we have to wait until that part's done. We can go with the current definitions in the business registry bylaw, use the ones that are currently in the land use bylaw. If there's any changes to the land use bylaw, then we can come back and make some updated changes to the business registry. So that's the four kind of most action items. Then there's the last two housekeeping items. So as changes are being made to the residential subclass bylaw, they're going to impact the property tax policy. So that policy is going to have to come back to council with an update, as well as there's information contained on our website. So that will have to be updated to make sure that it jives with the documents and the policies and the bylaws that council has passed. So once everything else is done, we'll undertake these couple of housekeeping items. I did want to provide a summary because I know it's important for council. Sometimes you get a lot of information coming to you and you'd like to know when you're going to see this again, or how do you get a chance to have an impact on what goes forward and what doesn't. Where are your decision points? Where is the information points? So I thought I would give you some council touch points in a summary slide. So basically there's 7 actions that are going to come and require council's action. So there's 3 bylaw amendments. There are other statutory documents to be determined yet that likely will have to come back for your adoption. There's a policy amendment, the tax policy amendment, and if there's any fees, we can't charge fees unless council actually adopts those fees and tell us to collect them. And then at budget time, we're going to be coming to you with resource requests. So there's a lot of decision-making touch points for council. In addition, there's 2 non-decision-making ones, but information being provided to council. The conversion process, how does somebody convert from tourist home to residential, as well as what will be the enforcement process. What do we plan to do? Do we plan to audit? To what degree? And all of that, so that you'll have that information, you'll know about the programs. Because I know people will probably reach out to you and either cheer or complain. So we want to make sure that you have the information to do that. And that concludes my presentation, and I'd welcome any questions that you have.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I'm going to start with a couple of questions. For the tourist home designation, the thought that the Livability Task Force had discussed was setting a date, so leaving tourist homes in rather than having to take them all out, but setting a date after which no new tourist home designations would be approved. Is that still in the mix, or is it somewhere else?
That's still in the mix. We're working with planning to determine when that work can be tackled. So it hasn't fallen off the radar. We're just not quite there
It's
yet.
still that sort of thing. It's just
That's
that,
the intention. Yeah.
and the reason I'm asking is because that's the understanding I
Yes.
had is where it was moving and when people ask. Right?
Yep.
With regards to business licensing, when we license tourist homes, obviously there wouldn't be a license issued if the tourist home is someplace where it's not allowed to be. Right?
Correct.
It has to be legal. But second part of this, though, is can we require a local contact in order to get a license?
We certainly can. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would be, if we're needing to get a hold of someone for some enforcement purposes, it's not ringing somebody up in London, England.
No, that's correct. Yeah, and that's part of the process development. And the whole idea behind gathering that information is exactly that. If there's somebody having a great big party in the middle of the night, like you said, phoning London, England isn't going to help us.
Yeah, and so having a local property manager, however we define local,
Yes.
it would be something that I'd be interested in exploring. Okay. Looking to members' committee of the whole to see if there are any questions. Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Catherine, for your presentation. With regards to, say, the tourist homes and the short-term rental piece, when will we start hearing more on the enforcement piece with regards to, say, fines and penalties?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of your question in regards to fines and penalties?
But when we get deeper into the process of looking at enforcement with regards to short-term and tourist homes, when will you start getting more information from you guys with reference to the size and magnitude of penalties and fines?
Yeah, that has to be in part of the bylaw. So the business registry licensing bylaw has to contain the fines and or penalties that will apply for false declarations or not having a license, that type of thing. So you'll see that when the bylaw comes to you for consideration.
And another question too, I know there's one part where you guys have to do some ground truthing to figure out, where there's potential offenders, areas that are problematic. Perhaps there's sites around town that are repeat offenders. Is there some sort of mechanism moving forward where perhaps people in the community could reference or email to flag a potential site for investigation?
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting, Councillor Ma, that you mentioned that. I was reading the City of Vancouver has a vacancy tax bylaw. That's something we can't do in Alberta, but in there, right on their website is, oh, do you have a complaint about a property that's vacant? So I can see that, a part of us developing this enforcement process is how do you develop a whistleblower or a complaint mechanism that would allow neighbors to sort of voice their concerns about something that they're seeing in their neighborhood.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay, looking to see if there are any questions or comments. This is the opportunity for the committee of the whole to provide feedback on what they've heard. If there's any concerns or anything like that. Councillor Graham?
Yeah, I just want to thank administration for all the work they've done on here. I think this is work we would have loved to have completed 3 years ago, but it is complex, and I think it's important that the community understands just how complex all these interconnected pieces are, and we can't get it done soon enough, but we're moving as fast as we can at the same time. So thank you all very much for your work and effort.
Thank you.
And the Livability Task Force recommendations were just approved in January. So
Yeah, no, it's been a process for sure.
Councillor Faubert?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Ms. Van Pima. Are there situations where there are entire buildings where every unit is a tourist home, or are most buildings where there's tourist homes a mix of residential and tourist home?
There's both.
Both, okay. When, how would, maybe I'm too early, but is that something that might be considered differently as you go through this process? I mean, I imagine if you have a floor of units and just one converts to a residential and every other unit is tourist home, that might create conflicts.
It may, but for this phase, first of all, existing tourist homes will be allowed to remain. If somebody wants to convert to residential, the reason why they can do that is that those units are individually titled.
Yeah.
It's not like an apartment building where there's one title for all of the units that are in the building. These are considered, like, legally individual properties, and individually, as long as they comply with the statutory regulations and documents for the town, they can do what they want.
And even like, when I read the definition, it says a dwelling unit.
Yeah.
And that right, so that is the only other use you could do.
Yeah, so dwelling unit is throughout our land use bylaw and lots of other statutory documents. And I think you'll see when we start bringing back bylaws for your consideration, dwelling unit becomes a key component of when this applies, when doesn't this apply. And so what we're looking at is if it's individually titled, then you consider it just for that particular unit.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. And then I'm really excited to see that the implementation plan includes ways to increase licensing and enforcement. I think that's exactly what we're hearing from the community.
Yeah,
So thank
definitely.
you.
Why would we make things more difficult? I think it's an opportunity for us to look at it. And in order to be effective, we have to be proactive. And to be proactive, we actually need the resources to do it. So, I commend council for the decisions you made to this point, which is allowing you to fast track getting this in place. And it will require us to continue to make brave, courageous decisions in order to get what we want.
Great, thank you. Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Worship. One question that kind of got brought to mind, Catherine, when you were talking about, say, the elements of the land use bylaw and having to work through the land use bylaw and all the various documents. Is there an advantage in the future of pulling some of these elements out of the LUB so we can be more nimble?
I think you have to be careful because that is the mechanism for controlling where development happens, how it happens, all of the other concerns. So to just look at one piece in isolation, I think that's part of our process, reviewing those documents, is to make sure we don't inadvertently allow something that we don't want or don't allow something that we do want. So I think we would just have to take a holistic approach to that. And it may be the answer that it comes out, but I suspect it might not be. We just have to be careful how we're defining things.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay. And are there any other questions? Seeing none, Ms. Van Pima, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And have a good rest of the afternoon. We're going to have a break now until 2:30. And we are back from our break. And now we're moving on to item D3, Keep Wildlife Alive Social Norms Campaign, the 2023 Ambassador Pilot Program. Ms. Van Gaal, how are you? Welcome. Oh, there we go.
Good, how are you?
Good.
All right. Well, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. As you know, my name is Caitlin Van Gaal, the Supervisor of Environment and Sustainability, and I'm joined here today by members of the Biosphere Institute of the Bow Valley, Nick DeRuiter, the Wild Smart Program Director, and Anna Christensen and Graham Verde, who are Keep Wildlife Alive ambassadors from 2023. So throughout this presentation, I'll give you a brief background on the program. I'm then going to hand it over to Ms. Christensen to go through some of the program details. I'll then come back up and share the next steps with you and then open the floor for questions. So as you may remember, in 2020, the town partnered with the town of Banff for the development and utilization of the Keep Wildlife Alive Social Norms campaign. And in 2021 and 2022, utilizing the $20,000 approved operating budget for content design, physical signage, and social media, radio, and newspaper ads, administration was able to set up the Keep Wildlife Alive Social Norms campaign to be a widely recognized brand across the Bow Valley. Having spent the last 2 years building the brand and the materials, administration in 2023 was able to expand on the previous tactics used under the program to pilot a more hands-on community engagement approach with a focus on the removal of wildlife attractants under the Bear Bombs brand within that social norms campaign. In the summer of 2023, administration contracted the Biosphere to deliver a on-the-ground, door-to-door campaign to influence social norms. The Biosphere was able to contract 2 recent university graduates to serve as the ambassadors to complete this work on a part-time basis during the summer and fall. One of those ambassadors unfortunately had to step down, but Mr. Verde was able to step in as an experienced Wild Smart ambassador with the Biosphere. The intention of the program was to have the ambassadors travel door to door, having personal conversations with residents about the importance of removing wildlife attractants from their property, as well as highlighting an understanding for human-wildlife coexistence within Canmore and sharing perspectives and potential actions residents could take to support coexistence. This work was completed between July and November of 2023, and I'm going to hand it over now to Anna, Ms. Christensen, to go through the program details.
Ms. Christensen, welcome to Committee of the Whole.
Thank you, Ms. Van Gaal, and good afternoon to Mr. Mayor and the Council. So as Ms. Van Gaal said, the 2023 year was the pilot year for this project, and we as a team learned a lot while bringing this project to life. The goal was to have educational, meaningful, and transformational conversations. By using an education-based approach, ambassadors, myself and Graham, traveled door to door to speak with residents about the risks of having wildlife attractants in their yards, in particular fruit-bearing trees. Ambassadors aim to create connections with residents, to understand their perspectives, and to provide them with background of the project, as well as multiple options to manage these attractants that they may have in their yards. During the pilot project, ambassadors focused on the downtown core of Canmore and moved outwards. So, as this is a pilot project, we learned and adjusted our methods throughout the season. During the early stages of the door-to-door canvassing, ambassadors only knocked on doors with visible fruit trees in their front yards, but it was decided by the working group that it would be more beneficial to knock on every door in the communities we were visiting in order to promote cohesive messaging, as well as to encourage communities working together towards this initiative. Ambassadors noted that even when residents did not have fruit trees, residents were very interested to learn about the risks of other wildlife attractants that they may have in their yards, such as barbecues, pumpkins in the fall, or bird feeders. You can see on this map here that blue indicates the area where ambassadors only knocked on doors with visible fruit trees, and yellow indicates the area covered where all doors were knocked on. Here you can see the handouts that ambassadors left with residents after conversations, or when residents did not have time to speak with ambassadors, but were still interested in the messaging that we were providing. The handouts were made in collaboration with the town of Canmore. They include some key messaging about the project and where to find details about the incentive program, as well as the Keep Wildlife Alive website. A brief survey was created, which ambassadors completed after each interaction to keep track of the infield data that was collected. And during the pilot project, ambassadors had 174 unique conversations with residents, of which 142 were focused on fruit-bearing trees. During conversations, ambassadors provided multiple options to residents in order to mitigate fruit accumulating on trees. For tree removal, ambassadors offered the incentive program through the Town of Canmore Sustainability Department. If residents were reluctant to remove their trees, ambassadors offered residents the option of borrowing fruit picking equipment from the Biosphere Institute at no cost. Many residents were unaware that their tree could pose as an attractant to bears, and some residents were unaware that their tree bore fruit at all. Ambassadors were sure to provide education and option to all of these residents. Overall, the project was very well received by the Town of Canmore residents. Ambassadors were able to have many interesting and transformative conversations, and the overwhelming response was that people of Canmore care deeply for the wildlife that we share this town with. Ambassadors had 13 residents pledge to remove their fruit trees using the incentive program, and 27 pledged to consistently remove the fruit from their fruit trees. 65 residents were previously unaware of the Keep Wildlife Alive program and were happy to engage with ambassadors as they educated them on the importance of removing these attractants. Some residents did display reluctance to removing their trees. Ambassadors understand that trees mean a lot to people. As you can see here, these are some of the reasons that were provided for reluctance. It is important to note that out of the 174 conversations had, only 55 individuals were reluctant to remove their attractants, showing that the majority of residents engaged with were supportive of the program and working towards positive human-wildlife coexistence. Ambassadors provided the alternatives to removing the trees, which I discussed earlier. So some positive outcomes. As I said, this project was very well received by the residents of Canmore. Here are a few key examples from this past season. So while speaking to a resident about the project, they volunteered to remove fruit from a neighbor's tree due to his restricted physical ability. Ambassadors spoke to a resident who was unaware that their tree bore fruit, and they proceeded to take down their own tree the next day by themselves. And many residents that ambassadors spoke with were unaware that bears had been in town or had been removed or relocated. Residents also expressed gratitude towards ambassadors for spreading the word and understood the importance of the project. Multiple residents also pledged to spread the word themselves. So here you can see the list of the working group involved in this pilot project. This team had monthly meetings where plans were made and progress of the project was shared. The project continually evolved as the team aimed to create the most effective approach to door-to-door interactions. The working group agreed that the goal of this project was that the ambassadors can lead by purely an educational approach. However, when necessary, the municipal enforcement team offered assistance and was willing to follow up with residents as needed. It should be noted that municipal enforcement also visited 105 households in a door-to-door campaign in downtown and large neighborhoods, which focused on the section of the Community Standards Bylaw related to wildlife attractants. Municipal enforcement also attended 50 households in other areas of Canmore in response to complaints or field observation regarding wildlife attractants. Municipal enforcement responded to 13 calls related to bears in town in 2023. So in total, between Keep Wildlife Alive ambassadors and the municipal enforcement staff, during the fall and summer of 2023, 329 households received one-on-one personalized education about human-wildlife coexistence and the importance of removing attractants in their yards. Working together, the Biosphere, the Sustainability Department, and municipal enforcement were able to generate a more holistic approach to this project. The interprofessional collaboration created a more manageable workload for all involved and ensured that all programming related to human-wildlife coexistence in Canmore uses consistent messaging and complements each other. In an effort to lead by example and to emphasize the importance of this initiative, the Town of Canmore has been continuously removing fruit trees on Town of Canmore land. In August of 2023, the Biosphere, with the support of the town, partnered with a local arborist to remove 6 fruit trees from Friendship Park and surrounding areas. The team invited members of the media to report on these removals. Mr. Mayor, you may remember this event from last summer as you were present for these removals and expressed hope that residents in the town would take advantage of the fruit tree removal incentive program. This action taken by the town assisted ambassadors in their conversations with residents, as some residents did express their curiosity about the town's plan to remove fruit trees on Town of Canmore land. Overall, it has been a pleasure to be a part of this pilot project, and I am really excited to work towards the next steps and to be a part of this project as it continues to evolve. Thank you for your time, and I'll pass it back to Ms. Van Gaal.
Great, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Ms. Christensen. I just wanted to wrap up by sharing with you the next steps for this program, as well as some other human-wildlife coexistence-related programs that we're doing as the town that complement the work of the Keep Wildlife Alive ambassadors. So as you can hopefully gathered from Anna's presentation, we thought that this Keep Wildlife Alive Ambassador pilot program was a great success and a really creative way to reach residents who may not be tuned into the town's traditional communication channels. We also felt that the personalized touch and the face-to-face conversation allowed the message to resonate in a potentially different way for residents. As a result, we will be continuing the program in 2024 with an earlier start date and with 3 ambassadors, the 2 returning from last year and 1 backup ambassador to spell them off if they need time off. They will be working on a part-time basis as well. Following this meeting, we'll be kicking off the 2024 program, determining the best locations and the key messages we want to deliver on, such as the Fruit Tree Incentive Program and any bylaw changes that occurred this year. The town of Banff and the MD of Bighorn are also interested in expanding this program to their communities, and they are currently in negotiations with the Biosphere Institute to run that program there. The 2 other programs that I wanted to touch on that support this work or complement this work are the Fruit Tree Incentive Program. So this is the incentive that the town has run for several years. This year we do have a higher budget of $60,000 that was approved by council on March 5th. And this is to cover 100% of the removal up to $500 per property. And I also want to share that we have begun the work to remove fruit trees on town-owned land. This was a council project that was put forward for 2024 for 5 years, $30,000 for 5 years. So we've begun this work in South Canmore, and residents should expect to see some work starting in the community in the month of June. We are starting with the easy-to-target fruit trees on town parks, and then moving to trees within road right-of-way. So these are the 2 to 3 meters outside of the road edge. So it may appear to be in people's front yards, so we'll be doing survey work to make sure that we're on public land, and then submitting a letter to any of those residents. And I also want to take a note to mention, and as requested by municipal enforcement in Alberta Parks, that if residents do see a bear or aggressive wildlife in town, to please call Kananaska's emergency service line. That is the preferred line. And with that, I would like to open the floor for questions. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Ms. Mangal. And thank you, Ms. Christensen, for your presentation, and Mr. Vardy and DeRuyter for being here as well. I might have just missed it in the report, but where is the focus going to be this year as far as what neighborhoods?
We haven't fleshed that out yet. We're going to meet with municipal enforcement to see where they're going to be working, hopefully kicking off in the coming weeks. My suspicion would be Cougar Creek, but we haven't.
Probably South Canmore area, most likely.
Okay.
Just because that's where we saw a lot of bears last year, where bears got into trouble last fall.
I liked the slide there that showed between your activities and municipal enforcement's activities, the number of households that were actually had that touch to create awareness. So that's great. Opening up to committee of the whole for any questions about this program. Councillor Ma.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for your presentation, Anna and Caitlin. Quick question. You guys said this last go-around, there were about 27 people that pledged to remove the fruit from their trees versus having a tree taken down. Do you guys actually double back and check if they actually did that, or did they just say that to get you off their back?
As part of the pilot program last year, they did not double back, but we're hoping this year on a day where maybe there's only one ambassador available, that they will go back and visit the areas that they had visited last year to inventory to see if there was any change in behavior in those areas.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you. Thank you all for your work on this effort, or on this front. I noticed last year we responded to 13 calls for bears in town. How is that, what is that number historically? Does anybody know?
I unfortunately can't answer that question. I don't know if Mr. Burt could answer it. No, no, we don't have those numbers at this time.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Okay, looking to see if there are any other questions. I don't see any, so thank you for being here and sharing this information. Obviously, you shared it so well that all of our questions were answered. So I really appreciate that, and good luck with your conversations that are happening this summer. Great.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move then to Councillor Updates. Everyone will have had a chance to read them. I'm just going to open it up. If anyone has a question for anyone, please let me know. Anyone? Anyone? Give you a chance to finish flipping through. All right, I see none. Councillor McCallum.
What? Last week, we got to do the inaugural run up to Grassy Lakes in the bus, and I was wondering, and it's not necessarily, it's the report that actually initiated this question. Are we going to be using a cutaway to go up there, or are we going to be using, she's like, I'm poised, I'm ready, a regular size bus, or a combination of what is available until our meant-to bus is made available? A forever bus.
Councillor Faubert.
I believe we purchased 2 smaller buses, and one of those, they're going to be doing it, and it's just weekends.
Right. So is it a smaller bus, meaning like a cutaway, or is it like a?
It's a little white one that
Okay.
says Rome on the side.
All
I
right,
just saw it recently.
Okay.
I think, it doesn't have like the full decal treatment,
Yeah,
but they're temporary buses.
gotcha.
Until, you're right, our actual bus comes.
Okay, because I've seen other buses, like my kids are noticing, oh, look, that's the like fish, well, we did the fish bus, and then yesterday, I think they ran a bus yesterday.
Yeah.
And
I was really surprised to learn we have 11 types of buses in the Rome fleet. And so I'm starting to learn the different types.
Yeah. They're
Because
switching it up. I wasn't sure
Yeah.
if they were dedicating a bus or if they were just going to switch it up.
they're dedicating the little one that we just bought.
Wonderful. All
So
right.
with the caveat that while dedicated, it's always subject to.
Tetris.
Yeah, exactly. Filling in if
Repair
a bus
Tetris.
goes down or something's needed from somewhere else, or ridership goes beyond the bus or whatever. They'll learn.
They fill in with the buses a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good question. Any other questions on the councillor updates? Seeing none, moving to the administrative update. All right, any questions under section A, corporate strategic team? Any questions under B, municipal services? Any questions under C, corporate services? Any questions for D, municipal infrastructure? And I would like to note that I am really impressed with our new 10-minute response map. I recognize that this 10-minute response is not so much about emergency responding as it is about building code, because you need to have a certain level of build if you're not within a 10-minute response. But I do point it out that from a response point of view, all of the work that has been done and the commitment that this council and prior councils have had to maintain the funding to build up the 4 on the floor at all times, which is where we are at now. We have achieved that. That's what results in this expansion of the map. It's the new location would just change where the little circle was before. The new location certainly serves the service so much better and our community so much better, but it's the 4 on the floor really that expands the reach of the 10-minute map. So that was very interesting to see. So any other question or any questions whatsoever of the administrative update? Seeing none then, anything arising from council resolution action list? And then there's the correspondence, so I will move that we adjourn. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Have a good afternoon, everyone.